Hello, everybody. I expect some of you get anxious for me to give you laws and rules about art that you think you'll be able to apply always and maybe just use to, maybe even to impress other people. But I don't want to give you any laws. I don't want to give you any rules about art because actually I don't believe there are any that are of any kind of value. I think that the only thing that I aim to give you is insights into the nature of art. Insights that you have to deal with. You see, you have to use them yourself. You have to perhaps even make up the rules that apply to you in relation to art through, I hope, through some of the insights that I can give you. And thus, when I tell you that, I believe the nature of art to be paradoxical, I believe that it is always standing in this curious relationship to life, in which it has to be like life, and it has at the same time not to be like life. And that everyone has always felt this to be true of art, and in a way demanded it of art. That it should be like life, and it should be unlike life. That it should be unlike life and like life. And that, when we say it, when I say it in English or in any other language, except possibly Chinese, because Chinese has so subtle a construction that it's possible to make paradoxical statements in it. When I say it in our language, I have to put one of the things first. I have to say that art is life-like, or that it is unlike life. One of them comes first. The only one way I could get around that would be to write them both on top of each other. Art is like life, and art is unlike life. And then what happens? Of course, you can't read it at all, because each one in a way cancels the other out. Each one is there so much that it cancels the other out. And so that won't do as the way to write it. The way I think that you can write it, and I want you to hold it in your mind, is in a circular form, so that you think of these things as not having any end and not having any beginning, that it isn't as though art is like life, but it is unlike life. It's as though these two things must remain always in your mind at once, as I think they do whenever you look at a work of art. That is it, and at any time this has been true. It has to have a quality of being like life, or else we won't be interested in it. We aren't interested in it. And I will wager that any work of art that you feel is distressing or displeasing or even boring to you, you feel that about it because you feel that it is outside of life or is not within the frame or the understanding of life that you have. And on the other hand, any work that you feel is some way exhilarating and marvelous, is desirable and good, will seem to you to be like life. Now, I think that's true whether it's the funny papers, or whether it's something that you see in a museum or something that you have painted yourself. That is, it runs through the entire range of art. And it always puts it in this, this little strange relationship to you. It seems almost as though it were deceitful, as though it were trying to fool you, trying to make itself to be like life, and trying then again deliberately to shut off life. Like the painting which I've shown you before, that looked exactly like an old photograph. I'm sure all of you have looked and seen old photographs. And you know what a curious quality they have. Now, obviously, when they were made, they didn't look like old photographs at all. They looked exactly like photographs and like life. But immediately something has happened, just the lapse of time shows, that they were not like life the way we see it. So the thing which is most realistic, the most passionately and devotedly and determinedly realistic that was ever made, I suppose, begins to seem less like that with the passage of time. And the quality that we think of as being unlike life begins to make itself clearer. I want to show you just as an example something which is very, very old. I hope that you can see it clearly enough. This is a famous seated scribe, which is from the very earliest period of Egyptian art, and is, at least 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years old. And if you can imagine, now what we see now in this reproduction, what we see is the marks of time. if we actually had stood in front of it when it was first made, the eyes are painted, you see, with great lifelike quality. They're made of another material. And the same as our own eyes, you know, seem to be made of another material, not just plain old flesh, but something shiny and bright. And the mouth was painted and the cheeks were painted. The whole thing was, in a way, very intensely lifelike and was intended to be, you see. The Egyptians felt, well, as everyone has, that the art must be like life, though it was made for death. It was made for the tomb. But it had to be living in order really to contradict death, to overcome death in the tomb. Now, when we look at these things, we may be more conscious of the ways in which it seems unlike life, as we are conscious of the fact the figure is very stiff and rigid, and the things that constitute Egyptian style show themselves to us very clearly, but certainly were not so evident to the Egyptians. To them it must have seemed exactly as photographs seem at the time they're made, really like life. And then time passes and they become less like life. Now, we require so little as human beings in terms of something being lifelike. You know, it's almost impossible to put something down which is not lifelike. It is almost impossible for me. I've tried it, and it's really impossible. If, for instance, I put down something like this, it's just a scrawl, you see. Well, then somebody says, oh, but that's exactly the way I feel every Monday morning. In other words, it's exactly like my inner life. It's exactly like the kind of confusion and whirling and despair that maybe has attacked all of us. Or somebody else might say, well, that's exactly the way I feel when people tell me something about the hydrogen bomb. I mean, this is the kind of thing that my mind starts to do. Not my heart in this instance, but my mind. So what is a complete scrawl is immediately, because of our wonderful human willingness to see ourselves and our willingness always to participate in something, to take a part in it, to believe in it, to live in it, because of this, it's very difficult for anything to be unlike life. In fact, if I put down something just like this, most of you would immediately read that as a person, as a human being. It would have that much quality of life. Now, it might not have anywhere near enough for you, but it would still have this much that you would be able, for instance, to finish it. We can say that this person is sitting on a chair, and right away, though these are nothing but little lines, you see, you believe in that as a person. With so little, I mean, what has this actually to do with any kind of human being? Well, you can say it has to do with the relationships. That is, this has some of the same relationships which a human being, which a human figure has. And therefore, I can readily believe that this is human. Not that it really is, because you see, always it is like and unlike. Always, you know, in the midst of this, you know that it really is not life. And it really is not a human being, and you would be, of course, quite surprised and maybe startled if somebody took it seriously as a human being. And if you make it, a little bit more, say you take just the head, and this time you don't make a schematization, you don't make just lines, but you put things like hair on, which immediately identify it as head, you see. And I can make shoulders, and I can put eyes in. As soon as I put an eye in, right away, you fill in the rest in your own mind. Now, this is much farther along toward being like life than the other one, and yet it still, of course, is really very, very far. And yet how willing we are to believe that this is. Now imagine that I had time to make this very much more illusionistic, much clearer, much more determinedly related to life itself. How rapidly you would believe in it. How if I made it a little bit more maybe pleasing or ingratiating in some way, you might actually become fond of it the way you'd become fond of a person. And it would begin to exist for you or to live for you as a person would live, though it has, in this funny way, no relation. no actuality. You would never think or say, well, it is really a person. But you do go right along with the feeling. You make a kind of willing, a ready acceptance of this, not as an image, but as belonging to life, as being real, even though it's far from it. And if, for instance, I put a dagger in her throat, you may feel that as very disagreeable, very unhappy. Suppose I put an arrow through her eye. You see, now this is nothing but paper. You saw this as paper. You know it is paper. You know that it is not real at all. And yet the image takes on a kind of living reality, even when it's a schema, even when it's completely, in a way, almost totally nothing there, that you've seen as know to be nothing but charcoal and paper. And yet it lives for you, because art is able to seem to be a living thing. Even while it is far from life, it partakes of life and lives and acts in your mind as if it were life. And if I do like that, and if I tear it up, you see, it might even hurt. I'll see you again.